The day I started my new job as a janitor at the Morrison Building, I woke up in a penthouse apartment worth $6 million, put on a pair of worn-out jeans and a faded work shirt that I had purchased from a thrift store the week before, and left my luxury sedan in the parking garage in favor of a city bus that I had never ridden in my life. The bus was crowded and smelled of stale coffee and too many bodies pressed together in a confined space, and I stood near the back, holding onto the overhead rail, feeling more alive than I had felt in years. No one looked at me twice. No one recognized me. To my fellow passengers, I was just another working-class man heading to another working-class job. They had no idea that the man standing next to them, the man in the faded work shirt and the scuffed boots, was the founder and CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country. And that was exactly the way I wanted it. My name is William Cross, and I am worth just over $3 billion. I built my company from nothing, started it in a garage when I was 23 years old with a laptop and a dream and a stubborn refusal to accept failure as an option. I remember those early days with a clarity that has never faded. The garage was cold in the winter and sweltering in the summer, and I worked 18-hour days fueled by nothing but cheap coffee and the desperate, burning conviction that I was going to change the world. I had no investors, no connections, no safety net. Just an idea and an unshakable belief that I could make it work. And against all the odds, against every prediction and every warning and every moment of doubt, I succeeded. Now, 20 years later, Cross Technologies employed over 10,000 people and had revolutionized the way the world processed data. I had appeared on the covers of magazines, had been interviewed by every major news network, had been invited to speak at conferences and universities, and even the White House. I had everything a person could possibly want: money, power, influence, respect. And I had never been more miserable in my life. The source of my misery was simple but devastating. I had a family, a wife and 2 children, and I didn't know if they loved me or my money. It was a question that had been gnawing at me for years, a splinter in my mind that I couldn't remove, a shadow that darkened every moment of my so-called perfect life. My wife, Catherine, and I had been married for 18 years, and our relationship had become a hollow shell of what it once was. I could still remember the way she used to look at me when we were young, before the money and the fame and the endless demands of running a global corporation. Her eyes would light up when I walked into a room. She would laugh at my terrible jokes, not out of politeness, but out of genuine delight. She would reach for my hand in the middle of the night, as if she needed to reassure herself that I was still there. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone I barely recognized. We barely spoke anymore. When we did speak, it was about logistics, schedules, the children's activities, the maintenance of the various properties we owned. The Malibu beach house needed a new roof. The Aspen ski lodge needed to be renovated. The yacht needed to be serviced before the summer season. She never asked me how I was feeling. She never asked about my dreams or my fears or the moments of quiet desperation that kept me awake at night. She looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of furniture. Functional, useful, but not particularly interesting. My children were even worse, and that was a truth that cut me more deeply than I could ever express. My daughter Victoria was 17, and she treated me like an ATM with legs. She spoke to me only when she needed money, and she needed money constantly. Clothes, concert tickets, the latest expensive gadget that all her friends had, vacations with people I had never met, cars she was too young to drive, jewelry she was too young to appreciate. She had not said, "I love you" to me in 3 years. I knew this because I had been counting, marking the days on a mental calendar, watching the distance between us grow wider with each passing month. She had not hugged me in at least 2. She moved through our mansion like a ghost, her face perpetually glued to her phone, her attention focused entirely on her social media presence and her carefully curated image. She posted photographs of her life online, carefully edited and filtered to create the impression of perfection, but she never posted photographs of me. I was not part of her brand. My son Ethan was 15, and he was angry. Angry at me, angry at his mother, angry at the world. He spent most of his time in his room, the door firmly closed, the sound of video games and music seeping through the walls. When he did emerge, which was rare and usually only when hunger or necessity drove him out, it was to demand something or to complain about something or to slam a door in my face. He had perfected the art of the door slam. He could put more contempt and fury into the closing of a door than most people could put into a shouted argument. He looked at me with eyes that were full of resentment, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what I had done to make him hate me so much. I only knew that I had failed him somehow, in some fundamental way that I couldn't identify and couldn't fix. I had tried everything to connect with them. I had tried family vacations to exotic locations, trips that cost more than most people earned in a year. We had gone to private islands in the Caribbean, to ski resorts in the Swiss Alps, to safaris in Africa, where we watched lions and elephants from the safety of a luxury Jeep. And through it all, my children had complained. The weather was too hot or too cold. The food was unfamiliar. The activities were boring. They missed their friends. They missed their phones. They missed their lives, the lives that didn't include me. I had tried expensive gifts, hoping that material generosity could substitute for emotional presence. Cars and jewelry and the latest technology, given freely and without condition. They accepted these gifts without gratitude, the way a person accepts a glass of water from a waiter, with the implicit understanding that this was simply what was owed to them. I had tried heart-to-heart conversations, sitting them down in the living room and attempting to explain how I felt, how much I loved them, how desperately I wanted to be part of their lives. They endured these conversations with visible impatience, their eyes darting toward the door, their bodies tense with the desire to escape. Nothing worked. Nothing ever worked. And so I had begun to wonder, in the dark hours of the night when sleep refused to come and the silence of the mansion pressed in around me like a physical weight, whether they would even notice if I disappeared, whether they would care, whether they loved me at all, or whether they simply tolerated my existence because I was the source of their comfortable lifestyle. The question was like a splinter in my mind, and I couldn't remove it. I couldn't ignore it. I had to know the truth, even if the truth destroyed me. The plan came to me in the middle of one of those sleepless nights, around 3 in the morning when the world was at its darkest and my thoughts were at their most desperate. I would disappear, not permanently, not in the way that would cause panic or police investigations or headlines in the tabloids, just for a while. I would tell my family that I had been called away on an extended business trip, something plausible and unremarkable, the kind of thing that happened all the time in the world of billion-dollar corporations. And then, instead of going on a business trip, I would assume a new identity, a false identity. I would become someone they would never recognize, someone invisible, someone they would treat the way they treated everyone else who wasn't wealthy and powerful and important. I would get a job in their world, a humble job, a job that would allow me to observe them up close without their knowledge. And through that disguise, I would learn the truth about who they really were and how they really felt about me. It took me 2 months to set everything up. The logistics were more complicated than I had anticipated, and there were moments when I almost abandoned the plan altogether. But I was a man who had built a billion-dollar company from nothing, and I was not accustomed to giving up when things got difficult. I hired a private investigator, a discreet professional who had done work for my company in the past, to create a false identity for me. The identity had to be perfect, flawless, convincing enough to withstand any scrutiny it might encounter. The investigator provided me with a driver's license, a social security number, a rental history, even a fake high school diploma, and a list of previous employers who would confirm my employment if anyone bothered to check. The name on the license was William Thompson. Bill, for short. A common name, an unremarkable name, the kind of name that blended into the background and disappeared. I grew a beard, thick and gray, the kind of beard that made me look 10 years older and completely unrecognizable. I had always been clean-shaven, had always maintained the polished, professional appearance that was expected of a CEO. The beard transformed me. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see William Cross anymore. I saw a stranger, a tired, weathered, ordinary stranger who had lived a hard life and was just trying to get by. I bought clothes from thrift stores, the kind of clothes that were functional and durable, and completely unremarkable. Work shirts with stains that wouldn't come out. Jeans that were faded and frayed at the cuffs. Boots that were scuffed and worn but still solid. I practiced speaking with a slight accent, a hint of the Midwest, something that would differentiate me from the polished, educated voice of William Cross. I recorded myself and listened back, adjusting the accent until it sounded natural, unforced, authentic. And I arranged for a job. A real job, not a pretend position that could be abandoned at any moment. I wanted the full experience, the genuine article, the kind of work that real people did every day to support themselves and their families. I applied for a position as a janitor at the Morrison Building, a sleek, modern office tower in the heart of the financial district. The building was 47 stories of glass and steel and polished marble, a monument to corporate ambition and architectural excellence. It was also the building where my wife Catherine worked as a senior executive. She had worked there for the past 6 years, ever since she had decided that she needed a career of her own instead of just being the wife of a billionaire. I had supported her decision, had been proud of her ambition, had told her that I wanted her to be happy and fulfilled. But I had also watched her drift further and further away from me as she became more invested in her work and less invested in our marriage. Now I was going to see her every day, up close, in her natural environment, and I was going to learn who she really was when she thought no one important was watching. My first day on the job was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I had given speeches to audiences of thousands. I had negotiated billion-dollar deals with some of the most ruthless business people in the world. I had faced down hostile takeover attempts and regulatory investigations and public relations crises that threatened to destroy everything I had built. But none of that compared to the fear I felt as I walked through the service entrance of the Morrison Building at 6 in the morning, wearing my thrift store clothes and my fake identity and my carefully practiced Midwest accent. The service entrance was nothing like the grand lobby where the executives and clients entered. It was a narrow, dimly lit corridor in the basement, lined with pipes and electrical conduits and the constant hum of industrial machinery. It smelled of cleaning products and stale air and the particular mustiness of spaces that were never seen by the public. This was the hidden world of the building, the infrastructure that kept everything running, and I was now part of it. My supervisor was a man named George Kowalski, a gruff, heavy-set man in his late 50s with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and hands that were calloused and rough from decades of manual labor. He had been working as a janitor for 33 years, the last 15 of them in this building. He knew every corner of it, every pipe and every wire and every stain that wouldn't come out no matter how many times you scrubbed it. He was the kind of man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing, and he looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between suspicion and indifference. "So you're the new guy?" he said, consulting a clipboard with a list of names and schedules. "Thompson, right? Bill Thompson?" "That's right," I said, keeping my voice steady, maintaining the accent I had practiced. "Bill Thompson. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Kowalski. I'll work hard. You won't be disappointed." George grunted, a sound that could have meant anything or nothing. "We'll see about that. Most new guys quit within the first week. They think this job is easy. They think anyone can push a mop and empty a trash can. They don't realize how hard it is until they've been doing it for 8 hours straight." He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my hands, which were still soft and uncalloused despite my efforts to roughen them up. "You don't look like you've done much manual labor, Thompson. What did you do before this?" I had prepared for this question. I had a cover story ready, a carefully constructed narrative that would explain my presence here without raising suspicion. "I worked in an office," I said. "Data entry mostly. But the company downsized, and I got laid off. I've been looking for work for 6 months, but nobody's hiring. I've got a family to support, so I'm willing to do whatever it takes." George nodded slowly, and some of the suspicion faded from his eyes. He had probably heard similar stories 100 times before. The economy was tough, jobs were scarce, and people did what they had to do to survive. "All right, Thompson, here's how this works. You show up on time, you do your job, you don't cause trouble, and we'll get along fine. The pay isn't great, but it's steady. The benefits are decent. And if you stick around long enough, there's room for advancement. Not much room, but some. He handed me a uniform, a dark blue shirt and matching pants made of a synthetic material that was designed to be durable and easy to clean. It was not flattering, but that was the point. Janitors were not supposed to be noticed. We were supposed to blend into the background, invisible and unobtrusive, doing our work while the important people went about their important business. "Locker room is down the hall," George said. "Get changed and meet me on the 3rd floor. I'll show you the ropes." The work was physically demanding in a way that I had not anticipated and could not have prepared for. My body, which had spent the past 20 years sitting in comfortable chairs and attending meetings and occasionally using the private gym in my penthouse, was not ready for 8 hours of scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans and cleaning bathrooms. Within the first hour, my hands were raw and blistered, the skin rubbed away by the wooden handle of the mop. Within the first 3 hours, my back was aching with a deep, persistent pain that radiated down my legs and made every movement an effort. Within the first 6 hours, I was so exhausted that I could barely stand, my muscles screaming in protest, my mind foggy with fatigue. But I didn't complain. I didn't slow down. I didn't ask for breaks. I just kept working, kept scrubbing, kept emptying, kept doing whatever George told me to do. Because this was the job. This was the life that millions of people lived every single day, and I had been completely oblivious to it. I had been so wrapped up in my world of wealth and privilege that I had forgotten, or perhaps never really understood, what it meant to work for a living. George noticed my effort, and by the end of the first week, his initial suspicion had softened into something that might have been respect. "You're doing okay, Thompson," he said, his gruff voice carrying a hint of approval. "Most new guys would have quit by now. You've got grit. I'll give you that." The compliment meant more to me than any of the awards or accolades I had received as a CEO. It was real. It was earned. It was given by a man who had no idea who I really was and no reason to flatter me. George didn't care about my bank account or my reputation or my carefully constructed image. He cared about whether I showed up on time and did my job and didn't make his life more difficult. And by those simple, honest standards, I was succeeding. The first time I saw Catherine in the building was on my 5th day. I was on the executive floor, the 35th floor, where the senior management had their offices. The hallway was quiet and elegant, with thick carpeting and expensive artwork on the walls, and the kind of hushed, reverent atmosphere that surrounds people who are very important and very busy. I was mopping the floor near the elevator bank, my head down, my movements mechanical, trying to be as invisible as possible. And then the elevator doors opened, and she stepped out. She was beautiful, still beautiful, even after 18 years of marriage, even after all the distance and the coldness and the arguments that had become the defining feature of our relationship. She was wearing a sharp gray suit that had probably cost several $1,000s, and her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek, professional style that made her look powerful and unapproachable. She was carrying a leather briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other, her attention focused entirely on the screen. She walked past me without a second glance, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her fragrance trailing behind her like a ghost. I was standing 10 feet away from her, holding a mop, wearing a janitor's uniform, and she didn't see me. She didn't even glance in my direction. I was invisible. I was nobody. I was exactly what I had set out to be, and the realization hit me with a force that made my knees weak. I had expected this. I had planned for this. The whole point of the disguise was to be invisible, to blend into the background, to observe without being observed. But experiencing it was different from planning it. The woman I had been married to for 18 years, the woman I had loved and supported and built a life with, had looked right through me as if I didn't exist. She hadn't seen me because she hadn't expected to see me. She hadn't expected to see me because I didn't matter. I was just a janitor, a piece of the building's infrastructure, no more worthy of attention than a light fixture or an air conditioning vent. I finished my shift in a daze, and that night, back in my small, dingy apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what I was feeling. The apartment was a stark contrast to my penthouse. It was a single room with a tiny kitchenette and a bathroom that was barely large enough to turn around in. The walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbors arguing through the plaster, their voices rising and falling in a familiar rhythm of domestic conflict. The ceiling had a water stain that looked like a map of some forgotten continent, and the radiator made a clanking noise every time it turned on. It was the kind of place that I would have considered uninhabitable 6 months ago. Now it was my home. The second time I saw Catherine was 2 weeks later, and this time, she spoke to me. I was cleaning the hallway outside her office, carefully mopping the floor in long, even strokes, when she emerged from a meeting. She was clearly frustrated, her expression dark and stormy, her jaw tight with tension. She was walking so quickly and with such focused intensity that she nearly collided with me. She stopped just short of impact, her heels skidding slightly on the damp floor, and she looked at me with an expression of pure, undisguised irritation. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, her voice sharp and cold. "Some of us have actual work to do. This hallway is a thoroughfare, not your personal cleaning station." "I'm sorry, ma'am," I said, keeping my head down, maintaining my Midwest accent, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she must be able to hear it. "I'll be more careful. I didn't see you coming." She didn't respond. She just brushed past me and continued down the hallway, already pulling out her phone and dialing a number, her voice shifting from irritation to businesslike efficiency as she began a conversation with someone on the other end. I watched her go, my hands trembling on the handle of the mop, a strange mixture of relief and disappointment and profound, aching sadness swirling through me. She hadn't recognized me. Of course she hadn't. The beard, the uniform, the accent, it was enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking closely. But she hadn't even looked closely. She had looked right through me, the way she looked through everyone who wasn't important enough to matter. And that, more than anything else, confirmed what I had feared for years. My wife didn't see me. She never had. The weeks that followed were a revelation, a slow, painful education in the truth about my family. I learned things about Catherine that I never could have learned as William Cross, billionaire CEO. I learned them by listening, by watching, by being present and invisible at the same time. I cleaned the offices of her colleagues and heard them gossip about her when they thought no one was listening. I emptied the trash cans in the break room and read the notes and emails that people carelessly discarded, printed copies of correspondence that they had meant to shred but had instead tossed into the recycling bin. I stood in the background during meetings, pretending to adjust the lighting or empty a wastebasket, and I observed the way my wife interacted with her subordinates. The Catherine I saw at work was not the Catherine I had married. The Catherine I had married was kind and gentle and full of warmth. She was the woman who had stayed up all night with me when I was launching my company, bringing me coffee and encouragement and the steady, unwavering support that had kept me going when everything seemed hopeless. She was the woman who had cried with joy when Victoria was born, holding our daughter in her arms with an expression of such pure, radiant love that it had brought tears to my eyes. She was the woman who had laughed at my terrible jokes and held my hand in the darkness and made me feel like I was the luckiest man in the world. That woman was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone cold and calculating and utterly ruthless. I watched her berate an assistant for a minor mistake, a young woman named Jessica who couldn't have been more than 23 years old. The mistake was trivial, a typo in a presentation slide, the kind of error that anyone could have made. Catherine's response was completely disproportionate. She stood in the hallway, her voice raised, her face flushed with anger, and she tore into Jessica with a cruelty that made my stomach turn. She called her incompetent. She called her careless. She told her that if she made one more mistake, she would be fired and escorted out of the building by security. Jessica stood there, her face pale, her eyes filling with tears, nodding and apologizing and promising to do better. And Catherine just walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, leaving the young woman trembling and devastated in the hallway. I wanted to say something. I wanted to intervene, to defend Jessica, to tell Catherine that her behavior was unacceptable. But I couldn't. I was just a janitor. I was nobody. And so I stood there, holding my mop, watching the aftermath of my wife's cruelty, feeling a shame that was so deep and so profound that it threatened to swallow me whole. I heard her lie to a client about a project timeline, promising something she knew she couldn't deliver. The client was on speakerphone, his voice anxious and demanding, and Catherine was soothing him with reassurances that were completely, utterly false. "Absolutely, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We're right on schedule. In fact, we're ahead of schedule. You'll have the deliverables by the end of the month, I guarantee it." When the call ended, she turned to one of her colleagues, a man named Robert who seemed to be her closest confidant, and laughed. "That idiot has no idea," she said. "We're at least 6 weeks behind. But by the time he figures it out, the contract will be signed and the money will be in our account. Then it's his problem, not ours." I heard her mock me. That was the moment that broke something inside me, something that could never be repaired. She was in her office, the door slightly ajar, talking to Robert. I was in the hallway, emptying a trash can, close enough to hear every word. "He's so wrapped up in his company," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "He doesn't even notice that I'm gone half the time. I could probably have an affair right under his nose, and he'd be too busy counting his money to realize it. He's not a husband anymore. He's just a wallet. A very large, very convenient wallet." Robert laughed, a low, unpleasant sound. "At least he's good for something," he said. "Most husbands are just dead weight. Yours is dead weight with a bank account." "Exactly," Catherine said. "That's why I married him. Not for love, for security. And he's given me exactly what I wanted." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs, making the world spin around me. I had to grip the edge of the trash can to steady myself. She had married me for security, not for love, for security. The 18 years of our marriage, the vows we had exchanged, the life we had built together, it was all a lie. A transaction, a business arrangement. She had never loved me. She had loved what I could provide. And now she was mocking me behind my back, laughing at my obliviousness, treating me like a fool who was too blind to see what was happening right in front of him. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to tear off my disguise and reveal myself and demand an explanation. I wanted to scream at her, to make her understand how much she had hurt me, how completely she had betrayed the trust and love I had given her. But I didn't. I couldn't. If I revealed myself now, the entire experiment would be over. I would learn nothing more. And there was still so much more to learn. I needed to know about my children. I needed to know about Victoria and Ethan. Were they like their mother? Did they also see me as nothing more than a wallet? Did they also mock me behind my back and laugh at my obliviousness? I had to know. I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The opportunity to learn about Victoria came sooner than I expected. The Morrison Building had a coffee shop on the ground floor, a trendy place called the Daily Grind that was popular with the younger employees. It had exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood furniture and a menu of artisanal beverages with names I couldn't pronounce. Victoria and her friends often came there after school, ordering expensive lattes and gossiping about their classmates and their teachers and their parents. I arranged with George to be assigned to clean the coffee shop during the after-school hours, a shift that nobody else wanted because it meant dealing with the mess that teenagers inevitably left behind. George was happy to give it to me. "You're a glutton for punishment, Thompson," he said, shaking his head. "But if you want to clean up after those rich kids, be my guest." The first time I saw Victoria in the coffee shop, I almost broke character. She looked so much like her mother at that age. The same dark hair and sharp features and confident posture. The same way of carrying herself that suggested she owned whatever space she occupied. She was holding court at a table in the corner, surrounded by a group of friends who hung on her every word. She was talking about a party she had attended the previous weekend, a party at a classmate's house that had apparently gotten completely out of control. There had been alcohol, she said, and someone had called the police, and several kids had been arrested. She told the story with relish, as if it were an adventure, as if the consequences were something that happened to other people. "My parents would kill me if they found out I was even there," one of her friends said, her voice tinged with anxiety. I'd be grounded for the rest of the year. My mom would probably send me to boarding school. Victoria laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that I had never heard from her before. It was not the laugh of the little girl I had taught to ride a bike, the girl who had crawled into my lap during thunderstorms and asked me to read her bedtime stories. It was the laugh of a stranger who had learned cruelty from someone and was practicing it with increasing skill. "My parents don't care what I do," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "My dad is never around. He's always working, always traveling, always too busy for us. And my mom is too wrapped up in her own life to notice anything I do. I could probably burn the house down, and they wouldn't find out until the insurance adjuster showed up. And even then, they'd probably just build a bigger house and forget it ever happened." The words were flippant, careless, the kind of thing a teenager says to impress her friends. But there was a grain of truth in them, a kernel of genuine pain, that cut me to the bone. She was right. I had been absent. I had been working. I had been so focused on building my company and accumulating wealth that I had neglected my own daughter. I had missed her school plays and her parent-teacher conferences and her birthday parties. I had been physically present in the mansion but emotionally absent, my mind always on the next deal, the next acquisition, the next quarterly earnings report. And now she was growing up to be someone I didn't recognize, someone cold and dismissive and utterly indifferent to the family she came from. And it was my fault. All of it was my fault. But there was more to learn about Victoria, and I continued to listen. A few days later, I overheard another conversation, this one between Victoria and her closest friend, a girl named Sophie. They were sitting in a quiet corner of the coffee shop, away from the larger group, their voices low and serious. Sophie was leaning forward, her expression earnest and concerned. Victoria was staring at her coffee cup, her face half hidden by her hair. "I don't get it," Sophie was saying. "Your dad is literally a billionaire. You could have anything you want. You could go anywhere, do anything, buy anything. Why are you always so angry at him?" Victoria was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was different. Softer, more vulnerable. The voice of the little girl I remembered, the one who used to crawl into my lap and ask me to read her stories. "Because he doesn't care about us," she said. "He cares about his company. He cares about his money. He cares about his reputation and his legacy and all the other things that rich people care about. But he doesn't care about me. He's never home. He never comes to my events. He never asks me how I'm doing or what I'm thinking about or what I want from my life. He just throws money at me and expects me to be grateful. I have a credit card with no limit, but I don't have a dad." She paused, and I saw her wipe her eyes with the back of her hand. "Do you know what it's like to be invisible to your own father?" she continued, her voice breaking. "To walk into a room and have him look right through you? To try to talk to him and realize he's not listening, that he's thinking about something else, that you're just background noise in his very important life? I would give up every dollar of my inheritance if I could just have a dad who actually wanted to spend time with me. But that's never going to happen. He's made his choice. His company is his real family. We're just the people who live in his house." I closed my eyes, the words echoing in my mind like a bell that would never stop ringing. I don't have a dad. My daughter, my own daughter, felt like she didn't have a father. And she was right. I had been so focused on providing for my family financially that I had failed to provide for them emotionally. I had thought that money could substitute for presence, that gifts could substitute for attention, that success could substitute for love. And I had been catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. Victoria didn't want my money. She wanted my time. She wanted my attention. She wanted me to look at her and actually see her, to listen to her and actually hear her, to be present in her life in a way that I had never been. And I had failed her. Every single day, for 17 years, I had failed her. The revelation about Ethan came from an unexpected and surprising source. One of the other janitors on the evening shift, a young man named Carlos Mendez who had become something of a friend to me during my weeks at the Morrison building, mentioned that his younger brother attended the same private school as my son. We were in the basement, taking our lunch break, sitting on overturned buckets in the dim light of the maintenance room. Carlos was a good kid, hardworking and honest, with a wife and a new baby at home. He talked about his family with a warmth and affection that made my heart ache. "That place is intense," Carlos said, shaking his head as he unwrapped a sandwich. "My brother, Mateo, he got a scholarship to go there. He's really smart, but it's tough for him. All those rich kids, competing with each other, trying to prove who's the most successful before they even graduate. They treat Mateo like he doesn't belong there, like he's less than them because his family doesn't have money." I nodded sympathetically, thinking about the private school where I had enrolled Ethan and Victoria, the kind of school that catered to the children of the wealthy and powerful. "Kids can be cruel," I said, keeping my accent steady, keeping my voice neutral, "especially when there's money involved." "Yeah, they can," Carlos agreed. "But you know what's weird? My brother says there's this one kid, Ethan Cross, who's having a really hard time. And his family is loaded. Like, billionaire loaded. But the other kids still pick on him. They found out that he likes to write poetry, and they've been giving him a hard time about it, calling him names, making fun of him in front of everyone. My brother says Ethan just takes it. He doesn't fight back. He just puts his head down and disappears into his own world." My son wrote poetry. I didn't know that. I had never known that. In 15 years of being Ethan's father, I had never once asked him what he was interested in, what he was passionate about, what made him happy or sad or afraid. I had assumed he was just angry, just difficult, just going through a phase that all teenagers went through. But the truth was so much more complicated and so much more heartbreaking. He was a sensitive boy, an artistic boy, a boy who didn't fit into the mold of what a billionaire's son was supposed to be. He didn't care about money or status or the things that his classmates valued. He cared about words and ideas and the beauty of language. And instead of supporting him, instead of encouraging him, instead of telling him that his passion was valuable and worthwhile, I had been absent. I had been invisible. I had been exactly the father my daughter had accused me of being. A man who provided money but not love, who was physically present but emotionally absent, who had never taken the time to truly know his own children. "I'd like to read his poetry," I said quietly, more to myself than to Carlos. "This Ethan kid, I bet his poems are really good." Carlos shrugged. "My brother says they are. He says Ethan is actually really talented. He just doesn't have anyone who believes in him. His dad is some big-shot CEO who's never around, and his mom is too busy with her own stuff. The kid is basically raising himself in that big, empty mansion." He took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. "It's sad, all that money, and the kid is still miserable. Just goes to show, money can't buy everything." Money can't buy everything. It was a cliché, something that poor people said to make themselves feel better about not having money. But it was also true. Profoundly, devastatingly true. I had spent 20 years accumulating wealth, believing that financial security was the greatest gift I could give my family. And in the process, I had neglected the things that actually mattered. Love, attention, presence, the simple, irreplaceable gift of being there for the people who needed me. The final piece of the puzzle, the revelation that would force me to make the hardest decision of my life, fell into place on a rainy Thursday evening, about 6 weeks after I had started my job as a janitor. I was working a late shift, cleaning the executive floor after everyone had gone home. The building was quiet, the kind of deep, resonant quiet that only exists in large spaces after hours, when the bustle of the workday has faded and only the essential systems remain. I was in the hallway near Catherine's office when I heard voices coming from the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see Catherine sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by several of her closest colleagues. There was Robert, the man I had heard her laughing with about my obliviousness. There was a woman named Patricia, a senior vice president with a reputation for being just as ruthless as Catherine. And there were 2 other men I didn't recognize, both of them in expensive suits, both of them wearing the expressions of people who were accustomed to getting what they wanted. They were discussing a major deal, a merger between 2 companies that Catherine had been working on for months. I had heard about this merger in passing, had seen the news coverage speculating about the potential impact on the industry. It was a big deal, the kind of deal that could make or break careers. And as I listened, I realized with growing horror that my wife and her colleagues were not just negotiating a business transaction. They were conspiring to commit a crime. If we can push this through before the end of the quarter, Catherine was saying, her voice sharp and commanding, we'll make a fortune. And the best part is, no one will ever know what we did. The regulatory filings are clean. The due diligence is clean. Everything looks perfect on paper. Except for the environmental report, Robert said, his voice hesitant, as if he were afraid of speaking up but knew he had to. If anyone finds out about the contamination at the factory site, the whole deal could fall apart. We could be looking at lawsuits, criminal charges, even. The EPA would have a field day with this. Catherine waved her hand dismissively, the same gesture she used when brushing aside my concerns about our marriage or our children. The environmental report is buried. No one is going to find it. I've made sure of that. And even if they do, my husband has enough money and enough lawyers to make any problem disappear. That's what he's good for, after all, cleaning up messes. He's been doing it for years. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the handle of my mop to steady myself. My wife was involved in something illegal, something dangerous, something that could destroy not just her career, but our entire family. She was covering up environmental contamination at a factory site, hiding evidence that could expose thousands of people to toxic chemicals. And she was counting on me, on my money and my influence and my team of expensive lawyers, to protect her if things went wrong. Patricia leaned forward, her expression concerned. Are you sure your husband will go along with this? From what you've told us, he's not exactly involved in your life anymore. What if he refuses to help? Catherine laughed, and it was the coldest sound I had ever heard. He won't refuse. He's so desperate for my approval, so desperate to keep our family together, that he'll do whatever I ask. All I have to do is pretend to love him for a few days, and he'll fall right back into line. It's pathetic, really. The man has $3 billion and no self-respect. The laughter that followed was general, a chorus of amusement at my expense. I stood in the hallway, frozen, my mop forgotten in my hands, and I felt something inside me break. Not my heart. That had been broken for years, ever since I had realized that my family was slipping away from me and I didn't know how to stop it. No, what broke was something deeper, something more fundamental. It was the last shred of hope I had been clinging to, the hope that maybe, somehow, my wife still loved me, that maybe our marriage could be saved, that maybe the distance between us was temporary, a phase that would pass, a problem that could be solved. But it wasn't. It never had been. Catherine had never loved me. She had married me for security, for money, for the comfortable life I could provide. And now she was using me, counting on me to clean up the mess she was making, laughing at my desperation for her approval. She was not the woman I had married. She was not even a decent human being. She was a manipulator, a user, a criminal who was willing to put thousands of people at risk for the sake of a profitable deal. I wanted to burst into that conference room and reveal myself. I wanted to see the look on Catherine's face when she realized that her invisible husband, the man she had been mocking and dismissing, had heard every word she said. I wanted to tell her that I would not be cleaning up her mess, that I would not be using my money and my lawyers to protect her from the consequences of her actions, that she was on her own. But I didn't. Some instinct, some cold, calculating part of my brain that had been honed by 20 years of business negotiations told me to wait, to gather more evidence, to build a case that would be unassailable. And so I did. Over the following weeks, I became more than just a janitor. I became a spy. I arrived early and stayed late, always volunteering for the shifts that nobody else wanted. I cleaned the executive offices when everyone else had gone home, and I went through the recycling bins and the trash cans with the meticulous attention of a forensic accountant. I found documents that should have been shredded, emails that should have been deleted, notes from meetings that detailed the conspiracy in explicit terms. I took photographs with a small camera I had purchased specifically for the purpose. I made copies of everything, storing the evidence in a safe deposit box that I had rented under my false identity. And all the while, I continued to watch my children. I saw Victoria in the coffee shop, holding court with her friends, her mask of confidence and indifference firmly in place. But I also saw the moments when the mask slipped. The moments when she was alone, staring at her phone with an expression of profound sadness. The moments when she looked out the window at the city below and seemed lost in thoughts that were too heavy for a 17-year-old girl to carry. She was hurting. She was lonely. She was desperate for a connection that she didn't know how to find. And I, her father, had been too absent and too oblivious to see it. I thought about Ethan constantly, about the poems he was writing in secret, about the bullies who tormented him for being different, about the empty mansion where he was raising himself. I wanted to go to him, to knock on his door and ask him to read me his poems, to tell him that I understood, that I was proud of him, that his sensitivity was not a weakness but a strength. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had finished what I had started. Not until I had gathered enough evidence to bring Catherine's crimes to light. The day of reckoning came on a Friday afternoon, exactly 3 months after I had started my job as a janitor. I had gathered enough evidence to fill a small suitcase. Recordings of conversations that Catherine and her colleagues believed were private. Documents that proved they had knowingly concealed the environmental contamination. A detailed timeline of the conspiracy, from its inception to its current state. It was enough to bring down not just Catherine, but everyone involved in the scheme. But before I went to the authorities, I needed to do something else. I needed to reveal myself to my family. Not as William Cross, billionaire CEO. Not as the wallet they had been using and mocking, but as a man who had spent 3 months living among them, invisible and ignored, learning the truth about who they were and how they felt. A man who had been broken by what he had discovered, but was determined to rebuild something better from the pieces. I chose the setting for my revelation with deliberate care. A family dinner, the first one we had shared in months. I sent messages to Catherine, Victoria, and Ethan, telling them that I was returning from my extended business trip and that I needed to speak with them about something important. I emphasized that their presence was mandatory, not optional. I used language that I had never used with them before, direct and uncompromising and brooking no argument. And to my surprise, they all agreed to come. I arrived at the mansion early, before anyone else, and I walked through the empty rooms with a sense of strangeness that was hard to describe. This was my home, the place where I had lived for the past 15 years, but it felt foreign to me now. The marble floors and the crystal chandeliers and the priceless art on the walls, all of it seemed like a stage set, a carefully constructed illusion designed to conceal the emptiness at its core. I had spent millions of dollars creating this illusion, and for what? My children were miserable. My wife was a criminal. My family was a hollow shell, held together by nothing but money and habit and the fear of what would happen if it all fell apart. I sat down in the formal dining room, at the head of the massive mahogany table that could seat 20 people but had rarely seated more than 4. I was wearing my janitor's uniform. I had made the deliberate decision not to change, not to shower, not to remove the beard that had concealed my identity for 3 months. I wanted them to see me as I really was. Not as the polished, powerful CEO they were accustomed to, but as the man who had scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans and listened to their secrets from the shadows. Catherine arrived first, sweeping into the dining room with her usual air of distracted impatience. She was dressed in one of her expensive suits, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked at me sitting at the head of the table in my janitor's uniform, and her expression shifted from confusion to irritation to something that might have been the first stirrings of fear. "William," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "What on earth are you wearing? Is this some kind of joke?" "Not a joke," I said calmly. "Please sit down, Catherine. We have a lot to discuss." Victoria arrived next, her phone already in her hand, her attention already elsewhere. She glanced at me, did a double take, and stopped in the doorway. "Dad, what's going on? Why are you dressed like that? You look like a janitor." "That's because I am a janitor," I said. "For the past 3 months, I have been working as a janitor at the Morrison building, cleaning floors, emptying trash cans, scrubbing bathrooms. And in those 3 months, I have learned more about this family than I learned in the previous 18 years combined." Ethan came last, shuffling into the dining room with his shoulders hunched and his eyes downcast. He was wearing headphones around his neck, and he removed them slowly when he saw the scene before him. He looked at me, at my uniform, at the expressions on the faces of his mother and sister, and he didn't say anything. He just sat down at the far end of the table, as far from everyone else as possible, and waited. The silence that followed was heavy and oppressive, filled with the weight of everything that needed to be said. I looked at my family, at the 3 people I had spent 18 years loving and providing for, and I felt a strange, complicated mixture of emotions. There was anger there, a deep and justified anger at the betrayal I had uncovered. But there was also love. Deep, stubborn, unkillable love. And it was that love that gave me the courage to say what needed to be said. I know everything. I began, my voice quiet but firm. I know about the environmental report, Catherine. I know about the deal you've been working on, the one that could result in lawsuits and criminal charges if anyone finds out what you've been hiding. I know about the way you treat your subordinates, the way you lie to your clients, the way you talk about me when you think I'm not listening. I heard you, Catherine, in the conference room with Robert and Patricia and the others. I heard you say that I was nothing but a wallet. I heard you say that you married me for security, not for love. I heard you laugh at me. Catherine's face had gone completely white, her composure crumbling before my eyes. William, I can explain. I don't want your explanations. I cut her off, my voice hardening. I want you to understand something. I am not going to cover for you. I am not going to use my money and my lawyers to make your problems disappear. You made this mess, Catherine. You chose to break the law. You chose to put people at risk for the sake of a profitable deal. And now you are going to face the consequences of your actions. I turned to Victoria, who was staring at me with wide eyes, her phone forgotten in her hand. I heard you too, I said, my voice softening. In the coffee shop, I heard you say that you don't have a dad. And you were right. You don't have a dad. Because I haven't been a dad to you. I've been a paycheck. I've been a provider. I've been a name on a credit card. But I haven't been a father. I haven't been there for you. I haven't asked you about your life, or your dreams, or your fears. I haven't shown up for the moments that mattered. And I am so sorry, Victoria. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and I saw her mask begin to crack. Dad, she whispered. I didn't mean. I was angry. I know you were angry, I said gently. And you had every right to be. I gave you money, but I didn't give you what you really needed. I didn't give you my time. I didn't give you my attention. I didn't give you the love that a father owes his daughter. And I can't undo those years. I can't go back and attend the school plays I missed, and the birthday parties I skipped, and the conversations we never had. But I can do better. Starting now, if you'll let me. Finally, I turned to Ethan, who was still sitting at the far end of the table, his expression guarded and wary. I know about the poetry, I said quietly. I know that you've been writing poems, and I know that the other kids at school have been giving you a hard time about it. I know that you've been suffering in silence because you didn't think anyone would understand. But I want to understand, Ethan. I want to read your poems. I want to know what you're thinking and feeling. I want to be your father, not just your landlord. Ethan stared at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, very slowly, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn notebook, its cover covered in doodles and stickers. He slid it across the table toward me, his hand trembling slightly. These are my poems, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They're not very good, but they're mine. I picked up the notebook as if it were a holy relic, and I opened it to the first page. The poem was short, just a few lines, but it was beautiful. It was about a bird trapped in a cage, singing a song that no one could hear. It was about loneliness and longing and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might be listening. It was the most honest and heartbreaking thing I had ever read. Ethan, I said, my voice rough with emotion, this is incredible. This is truly, genuinely incredible. You have a gift, a real gift, and I am so proud of you. I am so proud to be your father. Ethan's face crumpled, and he buried his head in his hands. I could hear him crying, the quiet, stifled sobs of a boy who had been holding in his pain for too long. I got up from my chair, walked to the other end of the table, and put my arms around him. He stiffened at first, resistant, but then he relaxed and let me hold him. We stayed like that for a long time, father and son, while the tears flowed and the walls between us began, slowly, to crumble. The conversation that followed was the longest and most honest conversation our family had ever had. We talked for hours about the mistakes we had made and the pain we had caused and the future we wanted to build. I told them about my 3 months as a janitor, about the things I had seen and heard, about the George Kowalskis and Carlos Mendezes of the world who had taught me more about hard work and dignity than I had learned in 20 years of running a corporation. I told them about the small apartment with the water-stained ceiling and the clanking radiator, and about how living there had made me realize how much I had taken for granted. Victoria told me about the pressure she felt to be perfect, to live up to the image of the billionaire's daughter that everyone expected her to be. She told me about the bullying she had endured at school, the whispers behind her back, the friends who only wanted to be near her because of her father's money. She told me that she had built walls around herself because she didn't know how else to protect herself from a world that only saw her as a symbol, not as a person. Ethan told me about the poetry, about how he had discovered his love for words in a creative writing class and had been writing in secret ever since. He told me about the bullies who had found his notebook and read his poems aloud in front of the entire class, mocking him, humiliating him. He told me that he had wanted to tell me about it, but didn't think I would care. He didn't think I would understand. There were tears. There were accusations. There were moments when it seemed like everything was going to fall apart, when the weight of the past threatened to crush our fragile attempts at reconciliation. But there were also moments of grace, moments of forgiveness, moments when I looked at my wife and my children and saw, beneath the layers of resentment and neglect, the people I had fallen in love with, the people I had wanted to build a life with, the people who were still there, waiting to be found. The resolution, when it came, was not neat or simple. Catherine resigned from her position at the Morrison Building and agreed to cooperate with the authorities investigating the environmental cover-up. It was a difficult decision, one that would have serious consequences for her career and her reputation, but it was the right thing to do. She also agreed to seek counseling, to try to understand why she had become the person I had seen in those offices, the person who mocked her husband and lied to her clients and treated her subordinates with cruelty. Victoria started seeing a therapist, someone who specialized in helping teenagers from wealthy families navigate the unique pressures they faced. She also started volunteering at a local community center, working with children from underprivileged backgrounds. She told me that it was the first time in her life she had felt genuinely useful, the first time she had felt like she was contributing something meaningful to the world. Ethan joined a poetry group, a small circle of young writers who met every week to share their work and support each other. I went to his first public reading, standing in the back of a small bookstore while he read his poems aloud to an audience of strangers. His voice was steady and clear, and when he finished, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. I cried, standing there in the back of that bookstore, tears of pride streaming down my face. As for me, I sold my company. Not all of it, but enough to step back from the day-to-day operations and focus on what really mattered. I started a foundation that supported arts education in public schools, inspired by Ethan's love of poetry. I funded scholarships for students like Carlos's brother Mateo, kids who had the talent but not the resources to attend good schools. I invested in community programs and environmental cleanup efforts and all the other things I had been too busy to care about when I was running a billion-dollar corporation. And I continued to work as a janitor. Not full-time, not for the money, but because I had found something in that work that I had never found in the boardrooms and conference centers where I had spent most of my adult life. I had found honesty. I had found dignity. I had found a connection to the real world, the world where people worked hard and struggled and still found reasons to smile. George Kowalski retired a few months after my revelation, and at his retirement party, I told him who I really was. He stared at me for a long moment, his granite face unreadable, and then he burst out laughing. "A billionaire," he said, shaking his head. "I spent 3 months bossing around a billionaire. My wife is never going to believe this." He clapped me on the shoulder, his grip as strong as ever, and told me I was the best janitor he had ever trained. It was, and remains, one of the finest compliments I have ever received. The mansion is still my home, but it feels different now. Warmer, fuller. The walls that used to echo with silence are now filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter and the occasional argument. Victoria comes home from college on weekends, and we sit in the living room and talk for hours about her classes and her dreams and the world she wants to build. Ethan reads me his poems before he shows them to anyone else, and I offer my thoughts with the care and respect they deserve. We are learning, all of us, how to be a family again. Catherine and I are still married, though our relationship is a work in progress. The trust that was broken cannot be rebuilt overnight, and there are moments when the shadow of her betrayal falls between us, a reminder of everything that went wrong. But we are trying. We go to counseling together, and we talk in a way we never talked before, honestly and openly, and without the fear of judgment that used to define our interactions. I don't know if we will stay together forever. I don't know if the wounds she inflicted can ever fully heal. But I do know that I am willing to try, and so is she, and that willingness is more than we had before. I still think about those 3 months as a janitor, the hardest and most humbling months of my life. They stripped away everything I thought I knew about myself and my family. They forced me to confront the truth about who I had become and what I had lost. But they also gave me something priceless. They gave me a second chance. A chance to be a better husband, a better father, a better man. I am still William Cross. I am still a billionaire. I still live in a mansion and have access to all the privileges that wealth can buy. But I am no longer invisible. Not to my family, not to myself. I am present. I am engaged. I am here. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I am happy. The 3 months I spent pushing a mop and emptying trash cans and scrubbing bathrooms taught me a lesson that 20 years of running a billion-dollar company never did. The most valuable things in life are not the things you can buy. They are the things you can only earn. Trust, respect, love, the knowledge that you have made a difference in the lives of the people who matter most. I lost sight of those things for a long time, buried them beneath the weight of money and power and the endless, exhausting pursuit of success. But I found them again, in the most unlikely of places, in the basement of an office building, surrounded by mops and buckets and the quiet dignity of honest work. And I will never lose sight of them again.